Even our president has been convicted of 34 counts of criminal fraud by a jury of his peers in New York.
Minnesota has lost billions of dollars in state-administered and federally funded programs due to organized fraud. Fraud networks operating in Minnesota dating back more than a decade.
You just watched that clip and wow. Andy Biggs didn't just challenge Jamie Raskin, he completely cornered him. It's about time someone did. What we're seeing here is a masterclass in contrast. Biggs coming armed with hard evidence about a billion-dollar fraud operation, and Raskin doing what he always does, dodging, deflecting, and trying to steer the conversation anywhere but the facts. We've seen this playbook before. The moment Democrats get exposed dipping into the taxpayer cookie jar, suddenly it's distractions galore, blame social media, change the subject, bring up anything except the issue at hand. But this time, Biggs zeroed in on something serious. A decade-long scheme in Minnesota where taxpayer dollars were allegedly funneled into daycare centers that didn't even have children enrolled. Think about that. 10 years. Billions of dollars. And barely a whisper about accountability. Raskin tries to posture like he's the sharpest guy in the room, but watch his reaction when that footage rolls. The expression says it all. He knows the narrative is slipping. Let's break down the full hearing and watch how Biggs cuts through the noise and shuts down the deflection once and for all.
Not by a right-wing social media influencer who's been harassing people in communities all over Minnesota in recent weeks, but by the hard work of real local investigative journalists, brave whistleblowers, and state and federal auditors. It is this fraud, which we must take seriously, is not unlike the $2.5 billion breathtaking Medicare fraud scheme uncovered last year in the home state of the chairman of this subcommittee, as he himself mentioned, or the massive COVID-19 unemployment assistance fraud scheme uncovered in Chairman Jordan's home state of Ohio. Even our president has been convicted of 34 counts of criminal fraud by a jury of his peers in New York related to the fraudulent payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels, and also civilly convicted in New York for different kinds of real estate fraud. Fraud is not headquartered in one state or one municipality, much less one ethnic, racial, or religious community. But President Trump couldn't resist the temptation to use fraud in Minnesota as an occasion to mobilize the power of the federal government to bully and intimidate first and second generation Somali Americans who live in that state.
Minnesota has lost billions of dollars in state-administered and federally funded programs due to organized fraud. Fraud networks operating in Minnesota dating back more than a decade have submitted over $9 billion, that's a billion with B, in false claims. Some high-profile cases in Minnesota include organizations and programs such as Feeding Our Future, Early Intensive Developmental and Behavioral Intervention, Housing Stabilization Services, and Integrated Community Supports. Now we're going to watch a video.
It's welfare fraud. It's all about the daycare.
They estimate as much as $100 million a year is being stolen by shady daycare center operators.
So how much money are we talking about stolen from the American taxpayer?
Well in excess of $1 billion.
Ripping off state-run programs intended to feed low-income kids, house the disabled, and provide services to autistic children.
Where are the children at? Do you know where the children are at? Where are the children at in these daycare centers?
I don't care.
Are there children here today?
No.
No children?
Yes.
So this is Quality Leering Center. Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going.
Attorney General Keith Ellison was focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was keeping these folks in business.
When do you think Governor Walz knew about this fraud?
From the very beginning.
What happened here in Minnesota that allowed this fraud to materialize?
The people at the highest levels of responsibility in the government of the state of Minnesota looked the other way.
Since 2021, the DOJ has charged 98 defendants in Minnesota-based fraud cases, 85 of whom are of Somali descent. Of the 98 defendants, 64 have been convicted. DOJ has now undertaken extensive investigative action, which includes issuing over 1,750 subpoenas, executing more than 130 search warrants, and conducting more than 1,000 witness interviews. Since the start of the Trump administration, the federal response to fraud in Minnesota has intensified following a series of high-profile cases involving state-administered, federally funded programs. One of the initial instances of high-profile fraud in the state involved the nonprofit Feeding Our Future, which was at the center of a $250 million COVID-19-related fraud scheme. As part of the scheme, fraudsters exploited Department of Agriculture, USDA food programs designed to provide meals for children. Federal prosecutors ultimately convicted 57 defendants and described the scheme as the nation's largest COVID-era fraud. The issue gained renewed national attention in late December 2025 following a widely shared YouTube video posted by one of our witnesses, Mr. Nick Shirley. Mr. Shirley's work highlighted suspected fraud in Minnesota child care programs. His reporting prompted federal authorities to intensify investigations, expand oversight, and coordinate multi-agency enforcement efforts. A week ago today, Mr. Shirley released a second video that documented alleged fraud in the transportation industry intended to provide rides for children, the disabled, and the elderly. Mr. Shirley uncovered companies with questionable addresses and vehicles intended to transport children, the disabled, and the elderly that remained idle for extended periods of time. We look forward to hearing from Mr. Shirley about what he was able to uncover. But how did we get here? Hopefully another witness, Scott Dexter, a former fraud investigator for the Minnesota Department of Human Services, can shed some light on that for us. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this massive wave of fraudulent activity didn't just have the consequence of ripping off taxpayers. It has drastically impacted
Let's talk about Jamie Raskin for a second. The man is a master of distraction. Andy Biggs brings up $9 billion with AB in alleged false claims, and what does Raskin do? He pivots to Medicare in other states and starts referencing Trump's legal battles in New York. Jamie, we're in an oversight hearing about Minnesota. Stay on target. It was one of the most obvious look-over-their moves you'll ever see. Instead of addressing the numbers head-on, he tried to redirect the conversation entirely. Meanwhile, Biggs laid out what he says is a decade-long scheme involving massive sums of taxpayer money. And then there was the reaction when Biggs mentioned Nick Shirley. That moment said a lot. An independent content creator with a camera reportedly uncovered more in a short visit than agencies did in years, and that clearly struck a nerve. The video montage didn't help Raskin's case either. Footage of questionable operations, staff avoiding questions, doors closing it created a powerful visual contrast to the numbers Biggs cited. 98 defendants, 64 convictions, 1,750 subpoenas. Those are serious figures, and they demand serious answers. At the heart of it all are allegations that funds intended for vulnerable communities, including children and people with disabilities, were misused for personal luxury. That's not a partisan issue. That's a taxpayer issue. By the end of the exchange, the confident posture seemed to shift into visible damage control. And when billions of dollars are being discussed, spinning the narrative gets a lot harder. So what do you think? Was that classic whataboutism, or a legitimate counterpoint? Let's hear it.